As of the recording of this video, we've already had a couple of teams that maybe had questionable quarterback rooms make decisions, like the Saints signing Derek Carr or the Seahawks bringing back Geno Smith. But for the most part, there's a lot of teams in the NFL left that we don't know what their quarterback is going to look like going into next year. So my goal in this video is to go through every team that looks like they're going to have some sort of quarterback change and predict exactly what's going to happen. Now, as I was going through this exercise, I realized it was pretty hard, and the odds of me getting more than 2 or 3 of these perfectly correct, it's not great. So I want to also focus on going through these teams and talking about not only the thing that I predicted them to do, but what all of their options are and what might influence their decision making. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, I've split this up into 4 different categories to make it a little bit easier to follow. Teams that are going to have the same quarterback, teams that are going to get a new quarterback through the draft, free agency, and then trades. And we're starting off with the teams that are going to have the same quarterback. The Bears with Justin Fields, there's definitely been enough rumors to buy into the idea that they're considering maybe drafting a guy at number 1 overall. I mean, there's 4 different, I think, really good quarterback prospects, and if you have the number 1 overall pick, you at least got to consider it. I mean, we saw the Cardinals do something similar with drafting Kyler Murray at 1, and that was obviously the right decision. But ultimately, more and more news has come out that they're probably not going to do that, and Justin Fields looked pretty good last year. I think most people would think it's crazy if the Bears moved off of Justin Fields, and I think if they were planning on it, you wouldn't have heard so much information about them wanting to trade the number 1 overall pick. I would say that if there was like a Trevor Lawrence level guy, or an Andrew Luck, or a Cam Newton, or a Caleb Williams, somebody of that caliber, I'd consider doing it, because Justin Fields, I don't think, is like a perfectly complete quarterback. As much as I like him and as high of a ceiling as I think he has, I would consider taking a guy number 1 overall. I don't think that's crazy, but I don't know if I think anybody in this draft class is of the level where I want to move on from Fields. And I think you also got to take into account that you wouldn't get as much back in a trade for Justin Fields as you would for the number 1 overall. So I'd say this is one I almost don't need to talk about, but yeah, I think the Bears stick with Fields. Then you've got Lamar Jackson, who literally, as of the recording of this video, got put on the non-exclusive franchise tag. I think the most likely option is that the Ravens end up keeping Lamar, because ultimately their choices are pay Lamar what he wants or be bad. Because the odds are if they move him and they start Tyler Huntley, they're not going to be very good. And maybe they're willing to go through a rebuild, but I think very few teams are going to just make the choice to go through a rebuild when they have the option to be a pretty serious competitive team. Plus, the rest of the roster is structured in a way to be good right now. So unless a trade they get for Lamar gets them back like enough assets to get a QB this year, they'd be turning themselves into a really unserious team. Now, I'll admit I'm very unconfident in this. I think literally anything could happen, but I would say that if you're playing the odds, the most likely thing is that Lamar comes back. But if you want to say that any of these teams offer him like the 3 first-round picks and they offer Lamar a huge contract that the Ravens won't match, they totally could get him. But maybe the Ravens are just letting him test the market, seeing what he gets, and then going from there. Then we move on to the Lions, who are sort of in a similar position as the Giants, except Jared Goff is on a contract, obviously, at least for 1 more season. There's been rumblings that they could take a quarterback at 6, and I think that's totally possible. If a guy that they like, that they want to develop, falls to them at 6, they're probably going to do it. Even though Jared Goff and that offense is coming off a very good year, after this season, it seems like you're going to have to pay Goff huge money, and you'd rather have a guy on a rookie contract who possibly has a higher ceiling, and we've already seen a team that won the Super Bowl had to trade him away to win one. The optics of keeping Goff and winning a Super Bowl aren't super great for them. But the thing that makes me think they won't end up doing that is, number 1, they're not probably going to trade up for their guy. I haven't heard their names in any of the trade up rumors. And number 2, I have a hard time believing that it's just like, if any of the 4 quarterbacks fall to us, we'll take them no matter what. They probably have a guy or 2 that if they fall to 6, they'd be willing to take. Like maybe it's Anthony Richardson because they'd love to develop him behind Goff. That's possible. But the thing is that with people trading up, 3 or 4 of the quarterbacks might be going before they get a chance to. And even the Seahawks who signed Geno Smith, they might be thinking the same thing. In fact, I know for a fact they are. So they're kind of later in the quarterback line than maybe picking number 6 overall would make you think. Again, this is a team that I think could draft a project quarterback in the 2nd or 3rd round just for the sake of it to see if they've got anything there. But if you're looking at, a Lions team that's on the cusp of making the playoffs and you're looking at how can we improve our roster, quarterback is not the first place you're looking because Goff was legitimately pretty solid last year. There's so many holes on the defense and you've got all these assets to go out and fix that. They'll probably see how good they can be with Goff before they make the move to get off of him. And then for the last one, I have the Falcons sticking with Desmond Ridder. I think if I were them, I'd be aggressive going after a quarterback. And I'm saying that as somebody who's a huge Desmond Ridder fan, like no question about it. I went to Cincinnati. But rolling into a season just starting a 3rd round quarterback is probably not the wisest thing. And if you're in position now to make a move or two and get up there and get a guy you like, you should probably do it. But I haven't heard as much noise about them moving up as I have maybe some other teams. Ridder is a guy who was drafted by the current regime. He only got 4 games to start and he looked okay and then slightly better as things went on. So I could see how you could say maybe we go get ourselves another dependable backup or another borderline starter in free agency and we give Ridder a try before we move on. I think that's completely possible. And I like Ridder a decent amount. I think he could turn into a very good QB and I'd like to see him with a full year of experience under his belt. You look at some of these other teams who are potentially drafting a quarterback like the Texans or the Colts or the Panthers, and they have no serious option outside of taking a guy in the top 4, taking one of those top 4 guys, right? With the Falcons, I think rolling with Ridder is more acceptable than maybe rolling with Davis Mills or skipping out on getting a quarterback if you're the Colts or something. So that's why they're slotted in here. Next, we're moving on to trades. I've got 4 teams listed here, but only 2 trades. I'm not going to predict the exact details of this, but the 2 of them are Aaron Rodgers to the Jets and Ryan Tannehill to the Commanders. And we'll start with Aaron Rodgers to the Jets. I mean, as I'm recording this, there's reports on my phone that Aaron Rodgers is flying to New York. I think for Green Bay, you've done what you can do in the Aaron Rodgers era. I mean, you drafted Jordan Love with a 1st round pick. You want to see what he has. I think it's hard to imagine, like, how do the Packers get back to being a Super Bowl contender in the time frame that Rodgers has? It's hard to imagine. And I think getting this done before Rodgers starts to show decline and before Jordan Love needs an extension, and then you got to deal with that, probably the smart move. And for the Jets, I mean, they were a competitive team that almost made the playoffs last year with the worst quarterback room I've ever seen. Maybe not the worst I've ever seen, but pretty bad. So getting a guy like Rodgers, who didn't have his best season last year, but also didn't have the best weapons, and a guy who I still think is a top 10 quarterback, it's going to be night and day. It's going to change their world, and I think they're going to pretty quickly turn into a serious threat in the AFC. So as many years as we hear like, oh, Rodgers might get traded, he might, and then it never actually happens, I am predicting that this is the year to do it. And in fact, I'm kind of nervous that this is going to happen before this video releases. And then for the Packers starting Jordan Love, it'll be exciting. It'll be fun. They're going to have to go through a little bit of a rebuild. I think Jordan Love is actually going to be pretty good. He's actually looked pretty good when he's gotten a chance to play, if it's limited. But at some point, you gotta know. You gotta figure it out eventually. You didn't draft him with this first pick for nothing. And then I've got the Titans moving Ryan Tannehill to the Commanders. Now, I understand, Commanders fans, you're not gonna like this. And I don't disagree. I don't think that this is a great move for the Commanders, but here's the thing. Ron Rivera is maybe more on the hot seat than any other coach in the NFL right now. He's so on the hot seat that if he starts off like 1-4, he's done, right? I know people want to see what Howell has. I'm sure that he will get a chance to compete in camp. But if you are Ron Rivera and you are at risk of losing your job, are you just going to say, well, it's going to be Sam Howell and nobody else, and I'm going to make no more moves to get anybody in that quarterback room, and I'm betting my job on that? Probably not. I think Ryan Tannehill is actually still a pretty good QB. I think he's still the same decent game manager that he's always been, and the Titans offense was just really bad last season. So I think he'd look okay, and I think the price to get him would be pretty low. I don't think they'd have to spend too much draft capital wise. Now, I'm not sold on the Commanders going Tannehill. This could be any other veteran quarterback who has a much higher floor than Howell does, like a Jimmy Garoppolo or a Jacoby Brissett or whoever you want it to be. You get the idea. But I think that Tannehill coming to the Commanders probably would make Rivera feel a little bit more at ease, and I think it's a little bit more likely than them just rolling with Howell. As far as the Titans go, I mean, they've cut a bunch of people. This era of the Titans is over. I made a video on it the other day on my TikTok. It's just, you've probably done what you can do with this core. You had a very solid amount of success. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. But ultimately, you've done what you can do. You need to go through a blow up. The A.J. Brown trade sucked. If you're going to trade Derrick Henry, and you're going to cut all these guys, and you're going to commit to a rebuild, there's probably no point in having Tannehill there. So I think they move him, and there's been rumors of that they're going to move him. The question is like, I don't know if you can just start Malik Willis. I don't know if it's just Malik Willis season for an entire year, because when he played, he looked borderline unplayable, unfortunately. So I think that they go and sign a pretty low-end free agent. I'm talking not even like a Garoppolo, like a Minshew or somebody who can just go in and manage the tank, and then have Willis compete against him in camp. And if Willis wins that battle and improves a bunch, great. If not, you'll probably be pretty terrible, and you'll probably have a high pick next year in what should also be a very good quarterback class. Then we move on to our teams that are going to get free agent quarterbacks, and these two might come as a little bit of a surprise, so let me explain them. First, you've got the Buccaneers getting Jacoby Brissett. Now, losing Brady and the age of the roster and their cap position tells you that they're probably going through a rebuild. They're kind of in the same situation that the Titans are in, right? But I don't know if they're really going to just roll with Trask straight up. Now, I said that the Falcons are going to roll with Ritter straight up, and now I'm not saying that the Buccaneers are going to give Trask a fair try. So maybe that's unfair, but I think it's completely reasonable to expect them to think, hey, we've still got, some pretty good vets on this roster. We're in a super bad division. Maybe a serviceable quarterback could get us a little bit more competitive and keep us in the playoff hunt. And if we can do that without overextending ourselves, maybe we will. Brissett is, I think, going to be pretty cheap this year, probably in like the $10 million 1 year range. So I think that bringing somebody in to compete with Trask is totally an expectation for them. But if you want to say like, no, the Buccaneers aren't going to go bring in a free agent, they're going to start Trask all year, and if it doesn't work out, then they'll have a high pick. Fair enough. Okay. I do understand it. What they do at quarterback this year, like if they go get a free agent QB, probably doesn't affect where the rest of the team is. You want to see what you have in Trask. You probably need to start clearing things up cap-wise, and that's going to take a season or two. If you want to make sure that you have somebody in there to compete with Trask, go for it. But I don't know. I think if they do something, it'll be cheaper. And then you've got the Dolphins bringing in Jimmy Garoppolo. There's been reports that they're exploring all of their quarterback options outside of Tua. And I don't think that has anything to do with how Tua played last year. He was pretty good. I think it has everything to do with the fact that he had 3 concussions. And if he has one more, it could be the end of his career entirely. So for them to just say, well, yeah, he's had these concussions and his career could end at any moment and he's never played through a full season, but we're not going to do anything at quarterback and we're going to have no, second option. I just don't know if that's realistic, because the Tua injury stuff scares me so much. And when Tua was out last year, the Dolphins were a horrible team. They were terrible. So I fully expect them to be aggressive trying to get somebody in there who they feel like is a serviceable starter and who might be willing to be a backup for Tua if Tua does end up staying healthy and playing a while. And I think the easy answer to that is Jimmy Garoppolo, who is fine being a backup. If the head coach comes from San Francisco and Garoppolo comes from San Francisco, that makes sense. Now, I will say that Garoppolo has his own injury risk, so maybe they take that into account and maybe they don't bring him in. But I think the fit there makes sense because they'll be somewhat familiar with the offense. There's been some reports that they're going to bring in Tom Brady. I guess it could happen. It wouldn't be super shocking, but he just denied that on his Twitter, saying he was busy taking care of a kitten. So for now, I'm going to say that's not going to happen. It's also possible that Garoppolo is out of their price range, but I think the way that the other pieces fall in my hypothetical world that I've created, Garoppolo all of a sudden becomes maybe not that expensive, or maybe you can backload the contract, or who knows what you can do. But I think overall, I expect the Dolphins to make a semi-serious move at QB. I think they're either going to bring in a really high-level backup, or they're going to bring in somebody like Garoppolo, or they're going to go after Lamar. I mean, they've got a lot of options, and I really do think they're going to explore them because the Tua health stuff is scary. And then that brings us to our last category, teams that are going to draft a quarterback. Now, I'm not super set on this order or these guys specifically going to these teams, but I wanted to put a name to a team, so this is what I came up with. You've got the Texans getting Bryce Young. All news I've heard is that they want to go with Bryce Young. They have the highest position of any team that wants to draft a quarterback, so it'd be the easiest for them to get their guy. I think the fans would like that. I think he'll be quarterback one on a lot of teams' boards. That's where most mock drafts are putting him there, and that's true from, people like us to people who are really connected to the NFL, and I believe that's because they also know that the Texans want to go get Bryce Young. I think this one's pretty set. This is the quarterback one that I'm the most confident in. I shouldn't say it's set. We don't know. Anything could happen. Somebody could trade up to one over them and take Bryce Young, but I think they're in the best position to get their guy, and I'm the most confident that Bryce Young is their guy. And then I've got the Colts getting Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson, for what it's worth, has the highest ceiling of any QB in the draft right now. He crushed it at the combine, improved his stock a ton. And if you're a guy who feels like you are really good at developing a quarterback, and if a team brought you in because of your track record of developing a quarterback, then wouldn't you want to get the QB who, if you developed them, would be the best? I think yes, and I think Shane Steichen has experience working with different young quarterbacks and getting the most out of them, even when they do different things. So I think he's going to see a guy like Anthony Richardson and say, yeah, he is a special athlete who doesn't come around every once in a while. If I can work with him for a couple of years, he could be something super special. I'm going to take the big shot and take the big risk and go with him. So then I've got the Raiders taking CJ Stroud. I think he fits a lot of what McDaniels likes to do. I think he's more of a prototypical Daniels type guy who's really solid in the pocket and super accurate and gets through his reads super well. I think McDaniels is also maybe a little bit on the hot seat, and you could argue, oh, do you want to take a rookie quarterback when if this season doesn't go well for you, you could get fired? I think that's a fair complaint, but my counter to that is, if I'm McDaniels and I have a chance to draft a top 4 quarterback, if I can just hit on him, like let's say the Raiders go 8-9, but CJ Stroud looks good and it looks like you have your quarterback of the future, you probably buy yourself more time. And I think CJ Stroud is the most likely of any of these quarterbacks to look really, really complete and composed right away. Maybe Bryce Young is above him, but he's got a very good chance to be great from day one. And then I've got the Panthers taking Will Levis, and he's not my quarterback one as a Panthers fan, but I kind of think that's the way that it's going to fall right now. Frank Reich likes really tall, strong-armed quarterback. Will Levis is tall and strong-armed. I don't think he's going to want to take on a project like Anthony Richardson. I don't think he's going to want a quarterback with the size disadvantage like Bryce Young. I think CJ Stroud's a very real possibility for them, and I think Levis is a very real possibility for them. If they go with the other two guys, it wouldn't stun me, I guess, but I don't think they fit what Reich has shown he likes. And while I have my concerns about Levis, I'm worried about his pocket presence and taking too many sacks. I do think in a good situation, him and really any of these guys could be successful. So those are my predictions. If I didn't talk about your team, that's because I think your team is going to have the same quarterback and wasn't worth talking about. Surprise, surprise, I think the Chiefs are going to probably bring back Mahomes next year and not cut him. But let me know in the comments what you guys think. There's a million different ways you could take these predictions and be super reasonable with it. This is just one way I saw it playing out. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll catch you guys next time.